I have to be honest with you. I'm very confused with all the information that I've got. I told you about air systems and how air testing, how their stock dropped when their CEO announced at their earnings call that they're projecting a decrease in their growth rate in the first quarter of this year by 20%, and the stock dropped about 34%. And then at the same time, I'm looking at AMD, and it's up 120% this year. NVIDIA's up 240. Rambus is up 76%. Broadcom 91, and Supermacro Computers up 287. And then I go and pull the data and look at the earnings for the top 10 semiconductor companies. Here, take a look at it, and you can see Intel's down, their revenue's down 16%, Samsung's down 37.5, Qualcomm down 16, Broadcom's up 7, NVIDIA's up 56, SK Hynix down 32. Overall, the whole industry's down 11%, and yet Supermacro's up 280 and NVIDIA's up 240. That just doesn't make sense to me. And then I pull this thing up and I see just today, the earnings that Goldman Sachs have sharply higher earnings. Morgan Stanley profits fell from a year ago. And then they said JP Morgan and Wells Fargo and Bank American and Cisco collectively earned about 104 billion, which is up 11% from the year, and JP Morgan made 50 billion in 2023. All these companies have all these profits, and yet I showed you a video yesterday that I took off of 60 Minutes where they're telling me that these banks have so many dead loans on their business that the whole market of New York City is overvalued by 60%. And then they're saying that this thing is also happening in San Francisco and in other cities around the world, that people are just moving away from the cities. And let me show you this again, because this just doesn't make sense to me.
So commercial real estate is a huge part of the book of business of your typical bank. And I'm talking mostly about these smaller and medium-sized, maybe regional banks. They have a lot of exposure. That is their bread and butter activity. About 30% of all their loans are commercial real estate loans. And here we are sort of seeing weakness in office that is something like that we have never seen before. And banks need to come to grips with that.
Are you comfortable calling this a crisis?
I think we're at the beginning. There's a potential crisis here.
In December, nationwide office loan delinquency rates crowded 6%, almost 4 times what they were a year ago. But banks have been reluctant to write down those losses.
We know that there's this buildup of bad debt in the system, but it's not being dealt with just yet. And it's in large part because the banks have been kicking the can down the road as best they can, trying to push this off as far as they can.
What does that mean?
It means that banks are entering into extensions on a lot of their bad loans, which essentially change their classification from a non-performing loan, a loan that's in distress, to a performing loan, a healthy loan, even though they haven't received a pay down on the loan and the collateral value on that loan continues to drop.
Extend and pretend.
That's right. And it works really well when interest rates are low because the banks can just keep the status quo going. But once rates are high, it doesn't really work anymore.
A downturn in real estate made worse by bad loans, contaminating banks and potentially the entire economy. Echoes of the global financial crisis of 2008 are hard to ignore. But whether the trouble with office buildings ends in a simple pricing correction or becomes a systemic crisis, likely there's pain coming, not just for building owners and banks, but for cities themselves.
In the long run, property taxes on those buildings will also fall by 40%. And these commercial property tax revenues are an important component of the budget of local governments, which means less money for police departments, trash collection, and some people are going to decide that, the quality of life has deteriorated too much and they want out. And in fact, that's what we've seen. In the last 3 years, our largest 10 cities have lost about 2 million residents.
You're losing that tax base as well.
And now you're losing that tax base. And now this cycle continues. And we end up in something that we have called an urban doom loop.
It's awfully quiet around here.
The urban doom loop sounds scary, and it's making the rounds, threatening cities beyond New York, Dallas, Chicago, to say nothing of San Francisco.
So I see this and I say, I believed the market was going to correct, and I got stopped out of a lot of these companies, and I'm confused. I've got to admit I'm confused. I then look at EV sales, and it says here that the EV sales are up for the 23 from 22, and even fourth quarter, that from fourth quarter of 22 to 23, they were up 29%, and yet Elon told me his sales were going down, and his profits were going down, and he was projecting a poor first quarter of the year, and we'll have to see when the earnings come out. But I'm confused, and I sit back and I ask myself, have I ever been this confused in the market before, where I believe that everything was there to bring the market down? I mean, the government debt, the downturn in semiconductor sales, the downturn in EV sales, and yet the stock market is going up. At least certain stocks are. I've only been this confused twice before in my investment life. In one of them, we put a label on it and called it a dot-com bubble. That everything just got out of whack, and then it just came slamming down, and then we got it back corrected. And then the second time was the subprime crisis, the banking crisis. And from what I told you about the banks yesterday, I think it's happening again. I think they're lying to us. I mean, how can it be that all these buildings are empty and the banks are saying, yeah, we're making more money. We're making more money. They're not being honest with us. They've got some tricky books, just like they did back in 2009, to disguise everything to look like it's something that it's not. So with that in mind, I'm confused. So I want your help. I want you to go into the comments and straighten me out. Tell me what's going to happen. Is this market, is it a surge, or is it a plunge? I just think I'm being lied to. And then you've got all this stuff going on in the Red Sea, the Houthis blowing up ships so they can't get oil to Israel, and the cost of shipping skyrocketing. So in order to get the oil, they got to go around Africa to get up to the Mediterranean Sea. There's just too much going on here to make me believe that this market isn't going to go through a major correction before we see the AI actually kick in. And that's something else that I want to talk to you about tomorrow. What I believe is going to happen in AI is phenomenal. But damn it, we got to get through this lying to us. Okay, I got that off my chest. We'll talk again tomorrow.